music and movies are a very interesting thing. When one goes digging to find out the combination that had to be involved to get the two together, it can be very surprising. Enter Alex Proyas's 1994 graphic novel adaptation, The Crow. Alex Proyas made two of the most stunning looking and cool films of the 90s, 1998's Dark City and 1994's The Crow. I remember sneaking into the theater to see this movie, and then again, and then another time, and again, and again. I was seriously addicted to this movie in the early summer of 1994, which was unfortunate because though it did okay critically, it was not a box office success, grossing just $50 million off a $23 million budget. Now, a lot of that would change on home video. Since then, though, spawning some fairly atrocious sequels and one okay TV show, the film's gone on to enjoy a lot of cult classic consideration and even cosplay love. Initially developed and financed by Paramount Pictures, they wrote the project off once the tragic death of Brandon Lee caused the production to shut down with an incomplete film. In comes Entertainment Media Investment Corporation, which was created for the sole purpose of buying the film and completing it. And they used some seriously groundbreaking CGI, special effects, and body double techniques to fill in those extra scenes that Lee unfortunately couldn't do. Both River Phoenix and Christian Slater turned down the role of Eric Draven. However, I think it worked out the way it should when it comes to Brandon Lee's performance. He embodied the role, gave it his all, and to this day, I feel it would have made him a megastar. The whole situation sucks, and it still makes me sad to know he'll never get that chance. The soundtrack for the film was set up by Jolene Cherry, a music supervisor turned A&R executive known for her rock expertise. She had a joint publishing venture at Warner Chappell and a consulting deal with Atlantic in the early 90s, where she would go on to work on The Crow. Cherry had supervised the music on 1988's 1969 and 1992's Cuffs, and would follow The Crow the next year with another 90s soundtrack classic, Batman Forever. Say what you want about the film, awesome soundtrack. With her final film being Michael, starring John Adele Dazeem Travolta, she started her very own music label in 2015 and penned a big agreement with Red Distribution for digital and physical media distribution. The original Crow creator, James O'Barr, constantly listened to Joy Division and The Cure while writing the graphic novel, so he was pretty stoked that Robert Smith of The Cure agreed to write the original song of the movie. For some reason, the entire band wasn't there. It was just frontman Robert Smith and drummer Boris Williams. Burn became extremely popular after the soundtrack's release, but until 2016, the band had never performed it live. We're going to find a common trend amongst bands and their contributions to this record and them refusing to play them live. The founding members of Joy Division, who then had become New Order 14 years prior, were asked to record a new version of Love Will Tear Us Apart, but it didn't pan out, and that worked out for everyone because the band did give their seal of approval on Nine Inch Nails' fucking brilliant cover of Joy Division's Dead Souls. Dead Souls went on to become one of the major standouts of the record, getting a ton of radio play. Stone Temple Pilots were initially set to appear on the Crow soundtrack via a song called Only Dying, but Scott Weiland and STP changed their mind after Brandon Lee was killed in that on-set accident, deciding that a darkly satiric song mocking death was probably not a good idea. So because of that, we got Big Empty, which is a fantastic song, and in and of itself, plays almost as a tribute to Brandon Lee. I remember seeing the first trailer for this movie after having heard that Brandon Lee had died. It just felt very fitting. My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, one of my favorite tracks in the album, After the Flesh. Just like with the rest of the tracks in the film, it is perfectly placed in the film at the right moments. Thrill Kill Cult performed the song while shooting the cameo in the film for over 2 days in what they called some crazy conditions. Founding member Buzz McCoy recalled, it was an abandoned cement factory, and it was really, I would say, it was about 20 degrees in there because it was cold and damp because it was so cold outside. We were literally freezing with leather and everything on. They had one room that had a heater in it that was for us, but all the kids in the audience that were shirtless and stuff were freezing, and we did that for 2 days. The track plays over a large burning cityscape sequence intercut with the band's warehouse performance playing outside of Michael Wincott's Top Dollar's headquarters and lair, then ramps back up once Eric confronts the group of villains to gather his prey, Skank. Another one of my favorite tracks on the album, and in the film, is Time Baby 3 by Medicine, a band I've been listening to for years. Notice I said in the film as well as the soundtrack. Let me explain. If you thought the track played by Medicine on screen, also in Top Dollar's lair, sounded different than the actual track on the soundtrack, you would be correct. On the soundtrack itself, the band is joined with additional vocals by the Cocteau Twins' dreamy lead singer, Elizabeth Fraser, and is actually titled Time Baby 3. Time Baby 2 is what we see the band perform on stage in the film. Two radically different versions of the same song. The song in the film is the version that was maybe a little more rough around the edges, let's say. So though I love Medicine's performance and the cut of the song in the film, I'd give a tiny advantage to one on the track that made the record. Something about Fraser's voice just gets me every time. The industrial rock band Machines of Loving Grace wrote an original song specifically for the soundtrack, having gotten pretty lucky to have seen the script before this film was even in pre-production. The song really feels like one of the few that are themed after the film and works so well within the aesthetic of the look, the feel, the characters, and the actions. It's a great song. Another track on the album is Rage Against the Machine's Darkness, originally titled, more appropriately for Rage Against the Machine, Darkness of the Greed. The track was recorded in 1991 before the band's first breakup and was intended to appear on one of their demos. But once they hooked back up and then they hooked up with Cherry, they re-recorded it for the soundtrack. It's great, but not one of Rage's best songs. Rage would go on to appear on many soundtracks in the 90s. Kinda goes a little bit against what you'd think they stood for. Other tracks include Violent Femmes doing a track very different than their usual fare, being a more somber and dark track. This is one of the ones I was talking about when I said there's a small pattern going on about bands who perform tracks for this soundtrack that refuse to play it live. But I was one of the few lucky enough in 2017 to see the Violent Femmes perform Color Me Once. They did mention that sometimes when they play it, that's when the crowds leave to go get their beer. For such an uplifting, fun band like Violent Femmes, I guess that sort of makes sense. Some other mentioned tracks on the album: Roland's band doing Ghost Rider, which was written about a Marvel comic book character of the same name. The Jesus and Mary Chains' Snake Driver is awesome, and it was written for the film despite being featured on their 1993 album, The Sounds of Speed. Due to the movie's production halt, the band was able to feature the track on the album. Now getting to the film's score, which was written and composed by New Zealand industrial rocker Graham Revell. Revell had previously scored the Australian-produced thriller Dead Calm, and gave it that sense of melodic insanity that it needed. Excellent film, excellent score. He went on to score many films through the years after The Crow, including From Dusk Till Dawn, The Craft, Suicide Kings, Pitch Black, and Blow, just to name a few. He was always proud of the work he did on The Crow, but felt the audiences didn't take to it as much once hearing it out of context of the film. Sometimes soundtracks do that. It later became a film score that people thought highly of, but at first it just wasn't a popular sell. Some have criticized the score for being too slow or sappy or sad. I feel that's an unfair criticism. Yes, it's an action movie with lots of cool deaths, fights, and guns, but in the end, it's a movie about a man who's lost everything. He's been murdered, watched his wife get raped and murdered, and then had to relive all those experiences before getting justice and finally being laid to rest. In my opinion, Revell evoked the perfect tone for the movie's main theme. The tracks composed for some of the action scenes are not quite as memorable as some of the sad ones. I feel the sad ones took on a newer meaning after the death of Brandon Lee.
Sir, Duke here.
And the way they were used throughout the film really helped you emote the sadness and accomplishment of what was done with The Crow. Turn to the Grave represented the theme that hangs over The Crow and the sad parallels of the film's story and Brandon Lee's untimely death. James O'Barr stated on the Crow DVD that when he met with the movie's execs, they originally wanted to make this a musical starring Michael Jackson. Thank God he laughed uncontrollably and thought they were joking. and basically laughed himself out of the room. For the past decade, there's been rumors, talks, and premature announcements about a Crow reboot. What can I say besides, I hope that never happens. The Crow should be laid to rest so we could always enjoy the beautifully crafted film that we have now in honor of Brandon Lee's final and best performance.